An unknown user who has since deleted their Reddit account wants to translate a public IP that is assigned to their firewall to a private URL, which is the server of an application that they want to make public. I'm going to show in this video why that particular implementation is not possible with the Palo Alto firewall, and I will show how you should give public access to your applications within your environment that are behind a firewall. I think this is a very interesting use case, and it shows a lot of different features of the Palo Alto Networks firewall, especially if you're attempting to use it for inbound inspection. So not just for user access to the internet, but for internet access to your applications that you are hosting inside your network. All right, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have a private application that you want to open up public access to, such as a web application, maybe you've been developing it internally, then you likely want to make sure that the access to that application is being controlled and that the individual network traffic is being scanned for any type of attack traffic, etc. And a Palo Alto Networks firewall can be a really good way to do that. Now, if you're like our Reddit poster here, that specific application may not be tied to a particular IP and instead might be tied to a URL. In that case, you might want to try to forward to that URL because the IP is not predictable, but you want to just forward it based on what the URL is. Unfortunately, the Palo Alto Networks firewall doesn't let you do that. You have to actually know what the IP is that you're forwarding to. So you may need to forward to an IP and then use another device that can figure out what the URL is and forward based on that. I'm going to show you how this works today, and I'm going to prove to you that you can't do it based on URL, and then I'm also going to show you how you should give access to the private apps, give public access to the private apps using your Palo Alto Networks next generation firewall. So here is a browser just so that I can show you my environment. Let me show you the two demo applications that I have. So right now I have two private applications set up, and they're just simply called app1, and I put them on port 6520 because that is what the Reddit poster was using. So you can see this is demo application 1, and this is app2, also on 6520. This is demo application 2. Now let's say you have, again, you might have a URL that can point to multiple IPs. And so let's say we have here, here's my DNS. So I'm using AWS for this lab environment. So I'm using the DNS from Route 53. And this is just a private hosted zone, which is tied to this virtual private cloud so that I can have an internal DNS here. So I'll just create a CNAME record, and basically that will forward my app to one of these applications. So we'll do app1, and then we'll have a low time to live because we don't want the cache to hold the URL for very long, because we're saying that this URL might change, so this won't be that predictable. So we'll say, oh sorry, this will be app1.wesleycyber.local, and we'll create this record. So now let me take this away. Now you can see in this environment, if I do my app, then this will take you to app1. But if we go back here and then we update it, we change this to app2 and then save. Then let's give it 10 seconds because that was a TTL. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And then we'll actually open up a incognito tab, because sometimes the Chrome will hold the cache even longer, even though the TTL is lower. If we do my app you'll see now it's on application 2. So before it was application 1, and I bet if I go here and I do this, it's still on application 1 because Chrome is holding that in the cache, but you saw that in the incognito, it was application 2. So it did swap over there. So we'll use that as part of our demo. So let's set up the firewall. I'll show you quickly my firewall setup relevant to this application access. First, let me show you the objects. Let's go to the services object. So you can see I already have this custom web app object with the 65, let me zoom in so you can see this a little better, the 6520 destination port. And then we have HTTP, which includes 80 and 8080, as well as HTTPS, which is 443. I don't know if you noticed, but I was accessing this not secure, so this is just on 80. This is just HTTP. We'll need that in the future. So this is just HTTP, not HTTPS. And then we've got the custom web app. Also in the addresses, I do already have the 2 apps here. So I have app 1 is at 2.22 and app 2 is at 2.9. What I don't have that I'm going to add is I'm going to add an app alias. DMZ app alias. And this will be an FQDN, and then this will be that myapp.wesleycyber.local. We'll make this, we've got these apps all in the DMZ resolve, so it's 2.9, which was number 2, if you remember that. And you have to make sure that your firewall can resolve. If you want to use this type of address, you have to make sure that it can resolve this FQDN, which you can do in device, services, and then, oh, I actually don't have the primary DNS server. So it's just doing that based on the default, but we can add it directly. And then I hate this, that this automatically puts that there. It's kind of annoying. All right. So now you might think that with that FQDN, we would be able to build a NAT policy. And actually the documentation says that you can do this. The documentation is, I don't know if I would say it's wrong, but it's at least incomplete. So if we build a NAT object, network address translation, where we try to map the public IP access to that private FQDN, then you'll notice that, so let's say we're going to the public IP. So I actually have a public IP just for the web apps here, which is the ETH1 interface web apps. And then if we try to translate that here, you'll see that that app alias that I created is not here. So it will not show the FQDNs. Now you might think that you can use source bidirectional translation, and unfortunately this will, the Palo Alto firewall will actually let you configure that, and then the commit will just fail. So let me show that to you right now. So let's get rid of this. And then instead of this, so we're going to do source. So we'll do source based on this app alias, which you can now see is here. And we'll start, so this will be from the DMZ to the internet. We'll do the source, and then the translation. So we'll do no destination translation. The translation will be static IP. It'll be this interface web apps, and then we'll try to make it bidirectional. So that way it goes back in the other direction, where if it tries to hit the interface web apps, then it'll translate to the DMZ app alias FQDN, right? And then we'll call this DMZ app access. All right, so now if we hit commit, just stand by, watch this commit. Ignore that. The commits are generally faster with the VMs. at least than it is with my 440. So I've been able to show a lot more of the demo without having to cut out the commit. So here we go. So you can see it failed, not allowed to add the you can read that, not allowed to add the FQDN address DMZ app alias in translated address. So even though it allows you to select it, it will fail on the commit. So this method will not work. So let's delete that. So how do we do this properly? So here's what you want to do if you want to give access to a private application. First thing you're going to do is, yes, you're going to create a NAT policy, and we'll call this DMZ app access. You're going to want it to be from your internet zone, your whatever zone is connected to your public facing interface, and then your destination zone actually is also going to be internet. This is a little bit counterintuitive because it'll be going into the DMZ zone, but initially what the firewall will see is just that internet to internet connection because it's going to that internet interface, and then after it translates it'll be going into the DMZ. So with the NAT policy rule you have to actually do the internet zone, and this will become even slightly more confusing once we get to the security policy, but one step at a time. Alright, so the service will be for the original packet. So if it's coming in, we want it to be that HTTP service. So we want it to be that port 80, and that's why I showed you those services earlier. So we're going to translate port 80 to the port 6520. And then we want the destination address will be that public Ethernet 1 interface web apps address. And then the translated packet will be a static IP, and this will be one of the apps. So we have to pick app 1 or app 2, and it has to be an address object that is an IP, so it can't be one of the FQDN objects. So we'll make it app 1, and then the translated port will be 6520. One thing to notice here is that this is stateful and this is sessionized, so that means that once it establishes the session that it's coming into the environment, into that application, the responses in that same session will also be part of this NAT policy. And so you don't need to create a separate outbound NAT policy just for accessing those applications internally. I actually already have another NAT policy for those DMZ applications to be able to reach out to pull updates and things like that. So really just to be able to access that application from the internet, you only need this destination address translation. You don't need to do bidirectional. Actually, I went to, when I did the network security analyst certification workshop and I helped write the certification, all the really smart global solutions architects that were there highly recommended against doing any bidirectional NAT policies. They recommended always doing 2 policies. So that's what we recommend. All right, so that is that. Now the other thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to create a security policy, and this is where I thought was interesting. Something that is worth showing you all is creating the security policy. So let's look at the security policy that I already have for this app. So you can see this public app access internal. So this is for my Global Protect VPN users as well as for my internal users. And one thing that's interesting about this, so source is from those zones, destination is the DMZ zone where the applications live. The application is web browsing, and the service is custom web app. So that port, and if you remember that custom web app was 6520, and then the action is allow. Now note that this is not using any kind of NAT, at least not for the internal users. So this will not, so this setup is pretty straightforward. When we need to create the external access, we need to think about the NAT because it is using NAT when it reaches in. And so the thing that we all need to remember, and if you're working with Palo Alto firewalls, you need to repeat to yourself this all the time, which is pre-NAT IP, post-NAT zone, pre-NAT IP, post-NAT zone. So as I clone this, I'll clone this and we'll make it afterwards. And we'll call this external. The source will need to be It'll still be, the source will be the internet, because even post-NAT, the source stays the same. So this will just be from the internet. And we'll get rid of these two, because this is for internet access. Source address can be anybody, anywhere. Destination is going to be post-NAT zone. So even though the destination zone in the NAT policy was internet, post-NAT zone will be DMZ. But note that it's pre-NAT IP, so these addresses are actually going to be incorrect. And instead, we're going to want to put that public address here. So this will be this ETH1 interface web apps. So a little bit strange, right? Web browsing will stay the same, but in addition to being pre-NAT IP, post-NAT zone, it also needs to be the pre-NAT port. So this custom web app won't work. We'll need to make it service HTTP so that it's allowing on port 80. We'll keep it allow. The other thing that's important here is this profile. This is where you're actually going to do that intrusion prevention system inspection, and we've got the strict group profile here. And then we can, so now this policy is actually allowing that access. We hit OK. We've now done everything that we need to allow that external access. Now I will commit. Hopefully this commit is relatively quick. That way I don't sit here and bore you all. But really that pre-NAT IP, post-NAT zone is just something you just have to keep remembering, because you're not going to, it's not necessarily super intuitive, especially if you're having different zones on the NAT than you are in the security policy. So it's just something that you have to just keep repeating to yourself. So there, the configuration's committed successfully. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to access this application publicly. And so I'm actually going to disconnect from my VPN, which is allowing me to access the application from the private side. And I'll open up a new tab here. And I've made it my app. Let's just do, just in case, myapp.wesleycyber.me. And you see it takes you to application 1. So now if that application changes and you change the IP, you're actually going to need to go into the firewall and change the application that it's pointing to, change the IP of what it's pointing to. So we would have to go to the NAT policies here, and then with this DMZ app access with the translated address, we would actually need to make this DMZ app 2. You'll note that it did translate to 6520. We'll commit this. Let me close, and then let's go look at the log of that application access. So this would be destination IP was 2.22. And here you can see that it was natted. It was that, yep, public app access external, and it was natted from 80. I don't know if I can see the NAT ports. I'm sure I can. NAT destination port, there we go, to 6520. See, it was web browsing, and it hit that public app access external, internet to DMZ. Okay, these aren't even these aren't even me. So this is additional people are accessing the website. All right, so now the commit has completed, and now if we go to this, you'll see, yep, so I refresh it, now it's demo application 2. So it's now forwarding to the demo application 2, and if we actually go here, actually what's funny is, what's cool is we can do this. So let's do this instead. Okay, let's just do 80. See if it comes up that we get that it went to app 2. And we can see it went to app 2. Here, we get to come up. All right, I wonder if we can see it in the session browser. This one doesn't show the... Okay, so we can see that it's going here to 80. Just need it to pop up in a log. There we go. So now you can see, there it is. It's going to app 2 instead of app 1. So once we change it, it's now forwarding to app 2, and it's actually pretty quick. But you do need to go into the firewall and change it. You wouldn't be able just to tie it to an FQDN and then change it in DNS. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You have to actually go and change it in the firewall. If you do need it to be tied to FQDN, you're going to have to use a different technology in conjunction with the Palo Alto firewall. But this is how you can give that public access to your private applications, and how you can use network address translation and the security policies together to not only make sure that the app is accessible, but also that it's secured and it's being scanned for any potential malicious traffic. There's also the ability to decrypt. So if it is an encrypted application, there's the ability to decrypt inbound using the private key of that server. If you're interested in that, put in the comments below. I'm happy to show that in another video. In this particular case, I was just using HTTP, so decryption wouldn't have worked. But I'm happy to show that in another video if that makes sense. But this is the steps that I'd follow. Just make sure you remember pre-NAT IP, post-NAT zone. When you build that security policy, it's going to be slightly different from the NAT policy, so just make sure that you think about that as you go through those. This is how you can give access to those private applications. Again, if you have any other suggestions, anything that you'd like to see in one of my videos, please put it in the comments below. I'm always happy to demo interesting problems that you all have. But for now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.